hesitate to shoot your hand up. Just to talk to you a little bit about the methodology, this is the second regional property sentiment survey that we've conducted. This time around we had over 25,000 respondents, so I'd venture to guess that's probably the largest sentiment survey that's been carried out. Those respondents came across 4 markets, Malaysia, Indonesia, Hong Kong and Singapore. We had some valuable feedback on the first survey, which we've incorporated into this survey. All of the respondents took an online survey and via our websites. So this is purely online. There's no bits of paper or anything like that. Just on a general level, and we'll delve down into Malaysia very shortly. On a general level, you can see some of the demographics of the respondents. Majority male, predominantly in administrative, professional or executive employment, which would typically be the realm of homeowners or aspiring homeowners. And generally in an age group which would reflect when individuals buy property. A bit younger in Indonesia, a bit older in Singapore. So a slight demographic skew on some of the data. Again, at a general level, you can see that there are some key trends in here. The factors probably that are most interesting here are the consideration of purchase, location in 3 of the markets. Sorry, I'm going to step side to side. Location in 3 of the markets was the #1 issue. Interestingly, in Hong Kong, price was the #1 issue. No surprises that the average property price in Hong Kong is the highest out of those 4 countries. So little surprise that price was the #1 issue, albeit that even in Indonesia, where the US dollar price was the lowest, it was still a concern, which reflects, I guess, the economic status of many aspirational homeowners in Indonesia. Can you do that for me? It just saves me turning around a bit. Just in terms of how they view overseas opportunities, in both Indonesia and Singapore, interesting that purchasing internationally was certainly considered an option for various reasons, mainly around migration and retirement, but not a huge skew. And again, as I mentioned before, the concerns around the housing market are generally around affordability and the price at which properties are increasing. So that gives you a brief skew or a brief view of the regional data. It's all in the document, as you know. So we'll delve a little bit further down into the Malaysian part of the survey, which I'm sure is of most interest to all of you. In Malaysia, the largest segment was in this early 30s group. The median point for income, household income, was about 80,000 ringgit. So that's household income. Most often, both members of the household working. And we had roughly the same people above that mark as below it take part in the survey. So again, both on age and income, this is the peak house buying kind of group. I guess one of the headlines is that a healthy view of Malaysia as still being a buyer-friendly environment. So whether you were a property owner, property investor, a potential property buyer, there was still relative confidence, albeit what we might say cautious optimism, that with relatively low entry point, that Malaysia still was a buyer-friendly market. In most instances, that buyer-friendly market, if you think of that as positive, tracks very closely to the general health of the economy. So with an election occurring at some point in the near future, there's always a little uncertainty. The economy, or general view of the economy, has a little uncertainty, so there's this cautious optimism in the housing market. So it tracks very closely to the general health of the economy. When we looked at the question of dual ownership, And these were the survey respondents. Quite a surprisingly high number of people owned more than one property. In Hong Kong, where prices were at their highest, obviously that percentage versus Singapore and Malaysia was relatively low, and Indonesia low again. But interesting in Malaysia that property continues to be probably the primary way that people invest beyond their family home. So buying additional properties continues to be the primary way that people invest outside of their family home. It might be slightly different in Hong Kong, where, for example, the share market or investment funds might be a preferred investment mechanism, but property continues to be the preferred place where people will invest outside of the family home, outside of their primary residence. And that was borne out in the data. Just in terms of where people, and I guess in terms of, if you think about this as price and timing, landed property is still, unsurprisingly, the most favoured type of property to buy or to invest in. And that trend has continued unabated. So landed property is still what everyone wants. No surprises there. Interestingly, that a majority of the respondents were intending to buy within the year. So you would say that is the near term. So there is still a degree of confidence in the property market. Most people are still in the sub 500,000 ringgit category. So this is, again, consistent with the survey that we did earlier in the year. So I'm not going to read all this to you, you can see, but majority of people looking to purchase soon, and a majority of people looking for a property in that 300,000 to 500,000 ringgit category. Remembering that the most common sort of immediate income point in this survey was around 80,000 ringgit. The most important factors that people are still thinking about in Malaysia was location. As I said before, in Hong Kong it was price. Singapore and Indonesia, it's location. So like, you know, the three rules of investing in property: location, 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 and that remains consistent. Price is a close second, obviously, so location and price still are the primary drivers. We are starting to see the track record of the developer become a more prominent consideration when people are buying. And obviously there was some legislative change recently that required developers to set aside 3% of the development value, more or less as a security. So people are increasingly concerned about the track record, and certainly from an investment perspective, you know, rental yield and ROI, so capital gain. So a very consistent set of concerns. Interestingly, that the developer track record is one that has become more prominent. And what that says to us is that buyers are becoming more informed and more sophisticated as time goes by. So buyers today have more information at hand and are following the market more effectively than they have been in the past, for various reasons. One, of course, is access to information. In terms of the most popular areas, and these are all around KL, not much has changed in terms of the top rankings. So just to explain this data to you, from right to left, I'm getting my colours right, is April to July. So April, May, June, July. The immediate left being, getting my colours right, Debbie? July. So you can see that Bangsar still gets more searches than any other area in Malaysia. Now that might be through aspiration, voyeurism, who knows? I still like to go on the internet and see how the rich and famous live. But Bangsar continues to be the most favoured location, both for apartments and landed properties. You can see that there's been a couple tail off to July, and some small increases at PJ and Morkiara, Charlum to an extent. So this top order has been very consistent. There is some movement, but the top four are really runaway winners from a search perspective. In terms of how Malaysians are thinking about the overseas market, many Malaysians have studied or worked overseas and increasingly have invested overseas. Half of whom are now saying not interested. The other half have an intention to purchase at some point in the future, mostly driven by retirement. So that might be someone wanting to retire in another location, possibly immigrate. And the three favoured destinations are Australia, Singapore and the UK. Australia and Singapore are kind of obvious in that they are relatively close by, very easy language, legal systems and security of purchase for Malaysians, and very accessible destinations as well. The UK, obviously different time zone, much further away, and consequently came in third behind two closer destinations. When we think about property investment from a purchaser perspective, if something goes wrong in your property, and it's in Australia or Singapore, or particularly Singapore, you can be there fairly quickly. If something goes wrong in a property you've bought in the UK, you're a full day, day and a half away. Some of the concerns that came out of the survey, and these are always, I guess, the chunkier stuff that we like to drill down into. The three largest concerns were, unsurprisingly, affordability was a runaway winner, and that's been a consistent theme over the past 12 to 18 months. We also mentioned that the view of property developers and the trust issue is becoming increasingly an issue. Over the past 12 to 18 months, if you follow the property market, there's been a deal of media about developers abandoning projects and some legislative change to try and rectify that. And then, of course, making sure that the economic and political environment is conducive to investment. And that probably, affordability will always be an issue. Developers will always be an issue, but this is really what underpins property investment. Making sure that the legal system, that the political environment, that the economy, it provides me with a secure place to invest. On the subject of rising home prices, some of the initiatives that have been undertaken to address this, you can read from the charts. There's a slight majority of people that believe that the loan-to-value mortgage cap will work in moderating some of the speculative activity. Most of our survey respondents cite property speculators as the main driver of the affordability issue. People flipping properties, never lived in, etc., right off the plan. So that issue will continue to trouble people. Obviously, there was a capital gains tax that was introduced. I think it's fair to say by the response that the jury is still out on the property capital gains tax. The capital gains tax is very low in Malaysia, internationally speaking, so I think if you were to increase it, you'd probably see that survey response move toward a more favourable view of, is it having an effect on the market? But at the moment, the jury's very much still out on whether that capital gains tax is actually working. And almost half of the people supported the amendments that I mentioned before about developers providing a security deposit, if you like, on the value of the new development. Perhaps one of the headline changes to come out of this survey is the attitude toward the first home buyer scheme that was introduced. When we ran this survey earlier in the year, in January or December, January, about a third of people said that they did not believe that scheme was working or would work. That's now increased to half. So half of the, well, 49, half. Half of the people took the survey don't believe that the first home buyers scheme will help first home buyers, compared to 33% earlier in the year. So that's a pretty significant shift in a relatively short time. Unsurprisingly, a majority of people also feel that, you know, protecting people, protecting property buyers should get more attention. And when we talk about protecting property buyers, I guess you can't legislate common sense, but people do want legislative protection regards developers and regards assistance in the process of buying property. We then asked a bunch of questions about the budget 2013. Probably a good time to put up your hand for budget suggestions coming into an impending election. The real headline numbers, and these were all very popular initiatives, but you know, tax deductions on housing loans, which exist in some markets, and that simply allows a home purchaser to balance off the deductions of their income tax. Lower interest rates, and of course better housing schemes. So the top two are really go to one's capacity to pay, to service a mortgage, and their ability to do that, and a lot of support too for protection of the home buyer. So stricter guidelines around price quoting, stricter guidelines around developers. So people are saying make the path to affordability more available, and at the same time I want legislative protection, so when I buy somewhere, I'm buying quality and I'm not going to get ripped off. So if we look at the takeouts, I think one of the most interesting ones is that generally Malaysia is still seen as a buyer-friendly market, but there is cautious optimism as the housing market tends to track pretty closely to the general economy. Under 500,000 is where all the action is, unsurprisingly, and this is people with a household income of around 80,000 ringgit a year. Key issue is still affordability, and the key issues remain for the government to do more to address the affordability issue, because there's a growing belief that what's being done now is not working. And that's evidenced in the attitude toward the first home buyers scheme. There is support for more regulation, legislative regulation, where it serves to protect a property buyer, particularly from errant developers. So people are cautiously optimistic. However, they do want more action, and more action that works on affordability, and they want more action on protecting the property buyer by way of regulation from developers to make sure they deliver on what they sell. So there is any number of additional data points in that survey. So I'm sure once you delve into that, you'll understand some of these headlines a bit more. But on a top line takeaway basis, these were the key findings to come out of this survey. Remembering that this is almost 12,000 Malaysians took this survey, so it is probably one of the largest surveys taken on consumer sentiment toward the property market. So I'm happy to take a pause while you absorb